She grew up in a small home where silence was common and words were often held back. There was no piano at first, only an old radio that worked when it wanted to. Music came through it in broken waves, but even that was enough to spark something inside her. As a child, she would sit close to the radio, her eyes closed, imagining her fingers moving over keys she had never touched. Music felt like a language that understood her better than people did. Her family was practical. They believed in steady work, clear rules, and not dreaming too big. Music was seen as a hobby at best, a distraction at worst. When she talked about melodies and sounds, they smiled politely and changed the subject. She learned early not to talk too much about what she felt. Instead, she listened. She listened to the world, to people, to silence. That listening shaped her more than she knew. The first time she touched a piano was at a neighbor's house. It was old and scratched, with a few keys that stuck when pressed. Still, when she placed her fingers down, something inside her clicked into place. She didn't know the rules. She didn't know how to read music. She just pressed keys and followed what felt right. The sound was messy, uneven, but real. She stayed there longer than planned, lost in the feeling. After that day, she looked for any chance to be near a piano. Sometimes it was in a school hall after hours. Sometimes it was in a quiet corner of a community building. She would wait until no one was around, then play softly, almost apologetically. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was only trying to understand herself. She never had formal lessons. Money was tight, and lessons were considered unnecessary. When people asked if she played, she would shrug and say, "Just a little." That became her habit. She downplayed her connection to music because it felt safer that way. People tend to judge what they don't understand, and she had learned to protect the part of herself that felt most fragile. As she grew older, life became busier. Work filled her days. Responsibilities stacked up quietly, one after another. Still, music never left her. Late at night, after long days, she would sit at a piano if she could find one. Sometimes it was a public piano in a nearly empty place. Sometimes it was a borrowed one, with the owner asleep in the next room. Those moments felt like stolen breaths of air. Her style was simple. She didn't play fast. She didn't show off. She focused on feeling rather than technique. Some people who overheard her would pause and listen, while others would walk past without a second thought. She noticed both reactions and accepted them. Not everyone listens with the same heart. One afternoon, she was playing quietly in a shared space when someone stopped nearby. After she finished, they clapped once, slowly, as if unsure. They told her there was a small event coming up and asked if she would be interested in playing. It wasn't a big stage. It wasn't a paid opportunity. It was just a chance to perform in front of people who might or might not care. Her first instinct was to say no. She wasn't used to being seen. Playing alone felt safe. Playing for others felt like standing in bright light without knowing where to look. But something inside her hesitated. Opportunities like this didn't come often. After a long pause, she nodded. As the event details were shared, the tone was clear. They wanted something easy, something light, nothing too long, nothing too emotional. One person even laughed gently and said, "Just keep it simple." The words were meant to calm her, but they landed heavy instead. Simple, to her, had never meant shallow. It meant honest. Still, she smiled and agreed. In the days that followed, doubt crept in. She wondered if her way of playing was enough. She wondered if people would get bored. She replayed the words in her head again and again. Keep it simple. The phrase followed her into quiet moments and restless nights. She tried practicing what they might expect. Short melodies, safe patterns, songs that faded quickly and didn't ask much from the listener. Each time her hands felt stiff. The music felt empty. She stopped often, staring at the keys, feeling disconnected. Then she returned to the way she always played. Slowly, carefully, letting emotions guide her fingers. Memories surfaced as she played. Long evenings alone, missed chances, quiet hopes she never spoke out loud. The piano carried it all without complaint. In those moments, she remembered why she played in the first place. Still, the fear didn't disappear. She knew people were expecting something small, something background-like. She worried about disappointing them. She worried about being judged for doing too much or feeling too deeply. But another thought grew louder with each passing day. If she played something that wasn't true to her, she would disappoint herself even more. The night before the event, she barely slept. Her mind moved between excitement and worry. She imagined walking away without playing at all. She imagined sitting down and freezing. She imagined playing and seeing people look away. Each thought felt heavy, but none of them stopped her. On the morning of the event, she woke up early. The world felt unusually quiet. She took that as a good sign. She didn't change anything about herself. She wore what felt comfortable. She didn't rehearse again. Instead, she sat in silence for a while, breathing slowly, letting her nerves settle. When she arrived at the venue, the piano was already there. It looked older than she expected. A few keys were worn down. One pedal squeaked softly when pressed. She tested a few notes. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was warm. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys and felt a strange calm wash over her. People moved around the room, setting things up, talking, laughing. No one paid much attention to her. That felt familiar. She took her seat nearby and waited. The phrase was repeated one last time by someone passing by. Nothing complicated, all right? She nodded again, just as she always did. But inside, something had already shifted. She wasn't thinking about rules anymore. She wasn't thinking about expectations. She was thinking about the girl who once listened to a broken radio and imagined a piano she hadn't met yet. As her turn drew closer, she placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. She didn't know exactly what she would play. She only knew it would start simply. Where it went from there would depend on courage. And for the first time, she felt ready to trust herself. The days between agreeing to play and the actual event felt longer than they really were. Time moved in a strange way, slow in the mornings and too fast at night. Everywhere she went, the idea of that piano followed her. Even when she was busy, even when she tried not to think about it, the sound of keys filled her mind. At work, she caught herself tapping rhythms on the table without noticing. At home, she paused in the middle of simple tasks, lost in thought. People around her talked about ordinary things, but her attention drifted. She wasn't nervous in a loud way. It was a quiet pressure, sitting deep in her chest. She kept remembering the words she had been told. Keep it simple. Each time she thought about them, they seemed to change shape. Sometimes they sounded like advice. Other times they felt like a warning. She wondered what people really meant when they said it. Did they think she couldn't handle more? Did they believe the audience wouldn't understand anything deeper? One evening, she sat at a piano she had access to for a short time. The room was empty, the lights dim. She placed her hands on the keys and waited. First, she played nothing. She just sat there, breathing, letting the silence settle. Then she began with a slow, familiar pattern. The music came easily at first. Soft notes, steady and calm. It was the kind of sound that didn't demand attention. She stopped after a minute and leaned back. Sounded fine, but it didn't feel right. Felt like she was holding something back. She tried again, this time letting her emotions guide her. The melody changed. It rose and fell, gentle in some places, heavy in others. Memories slipped into the music without asking permission. Moments of loneliness, small joys, long waits. The piano seemed to respond, filling the room with something warmer and fuller. She stopped suddenly, her hands still hovering over the keys. This was the kind of playing she loved. But was it what they wanted? She imagined the faces of people in the audience, some listening closely, others distracted, some expecting background noise. The thought made her uneasy. Over the next few days, she went back and forth. One moment, she told herself to follow the instructions exactly. Play something short, something easy, something forgettable. The next moment, she felt almost angry at the idea. Why ask someone to play if you didn't want them to truly play? She spoke to no one about these thoughts. She had learned long ago that explaining her feelings often led to misunderstanding. Instead, she carried the questions quietly, letting them sit with her. As the event grew closer, small comments from others added to the pressure. Someone joked that she must be practicing something very basic. Another person reminded her that people had short attention spans. None of it was said with cruelty, but each remark chipped away at her confidence. The piano she would be playing on the day of the event wasn't hers to practice on. She would only get a short moment to test it before performing. That worried her more than she expected. Every piano had its own personality. Some keys were sensitive. Others required more force. She liked knowing an instrument well before trusting it. One afternoon, she managed to visit the venue briefly. The room was larger than she remembered. Empty chairs faced the small stage. The piano stood in the corner, its surface dull from years of use. She pressed a few keys. Some notes rang clearly. Others sounded slightly flat. It wasn't perfect, but it was usable. As she played a few quiet notes, footsteps echoed behind her. Someone was watching. She finished quickly and stood up, feeling exposed. The person smiled and said she sounded nice, then reminded her again not to overdo it. She thanked them politely, even though her chest felt tight. That night, she lay awake replaying the moment. Not the reminder, but the sound of the piano. Even with its flaws, it had responded to her touch. That gave her comfort. Music didn't need perfection. It needed honesty. The day before the event arrived faster than she expected. She spent most of it trying to distract herself. Cleaning, walking, doing anything that kept her hands busy. Still, every quiet moment pulled her thoughts back to the same place. Late in the evening, she sat down one last time at a piano. This time she didn't plan. She didn't correct mistakes. She didn't stop herself when the melody grew stronger. She let the music flow exactly as it wanted to. When she finished, she felt something she hadn't felt all week. Relief. Not because the music was perfect, but because it was true. She realized then that no matter what happened at the event, this was how she needed to play. The morning of the event arrived with gray skies. She took it as a reminder that not everything had to be bright to be meaningful. She moved through her routine slowly, paying attention to small details. The feel of her clothes, the sound of her steps, the rhythm of her breathing. When she arrived, the room was already filling with people. Voices blended together, creating a low hum. She found a quiet corner and waited. No one spoke to her at first, and she was grateful for that. As the program moved forward, her turn drew closer. She listened to the performances before her. Some were lively. Some were rushed. The audience responded politely to each one. She wondered how they would react to her. Finally, someone gestured for her to get ready. Her heart beat faster, but her hands were steady. She walked toward the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. Before playing, she paused. The room felt different from the empty spaces she was used to. There was energy in the air, mixed with expectation and distraction. She took a slow breath and reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't there to impress. She wasn't there to prove anything. She was there to share something honest, even if it was simple. As her fingers hovered over the keys, she made a quiet choice. She would begin the way they expected. Soft, calm, simple. What happened after that, she would allow herself to discover in the moment. The first note sounded clear and gentle, cutting through the noise of the room. The second followed. Then the third. The music had begun, and there was no turning back. The first notes floated into the room like a quiet question. They were soft and careful, just as she had been asked to play. The melody moved slowly, giving people time to notice it without feeling pushed. A few conversations faded. Chairs stopped shifting. The sound settled into the space, gentle and steady. She kept her eyes on the keys. Her shoulders relaxed as her fingers found their place. The piano responded in its own imperfect way, some notes warmer than others. She adjusted without thinking, letting her touch guide the sound. For a moment, it felt like she was back in an empty room, playing only for herself. The simple melody continued, repeating with small changes. It was familiar enough to feel safe. She could sense the audience listening now, even if only halfway. She breathed out slowly and let the rhythm carry her forward. Then, without planning it, she added a note that wasn't there before. It was quiet, almost hidden, but it changed the feeling of the music. Her hands hesitated for half a second, then moved again. The melody widened, like a path opening up. She felt a flicker of fear. This wasn't part of the simple version she had practiced. But the sound felt right. She trusted it and continued. The piano seemed to lean into her touch, as if encouraging her to go on. The music grew just a little stronger. Not louder, but deeper. The pauses between notes became meaningful, holding emotion instead of silence. A few people in the audience leaned forward without realizing it. Someone near the back stopped checking their phone. She didn't look up, but she felt the shift. The room had changed. The music was no longer background sound. It had become the focus. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. The melody twisted gently, carrying hints of joy and sadness together. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't rush. It told a story in its own quiet way. She remembered long nights when this kind of music was the only thing that made sense. She remembered playing softly so no one would hear. Those memories flowed into her hands, shaping each note. The piano wasn't perfect. A few keys sounded dull. One note rang sharper than expected. She worked around it, turning flaws into part of the sound. Instead of fighting the instrument, she listened to it. As the music continued, the room grew still. Even the air felt quieter. People who had come expecting something light now found themselves paying closer attention. They didn't know why, only that they didn't want to miss the next note. She let the melody rise slightly, then fall back again. Felt like breathing, in and out, simple but alive. The fear she had carried for days began to fade, replaced by a calm focus. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel present. Not thinking about judgment, not worrying about mistakes, just listening and responding. She added another layer to the music, soft chords supporting the main melody. It was still gentle, still simple on the surface, but richer underneath. The piano filled the room without overwhelming it. Someone in the front row closed their eyes. Another person folded their hands, resting them on their lap. The usual sounds of a restless audience were gone. She reached a point where she would normally stop. The simple ending she had practiced waited there, ready. Her hands hovered for a moment. She could end it now and no one would complain. Instead, she continued. The next section came from a deeper place. The melody slowed, carrying weight and warmth together. Felt like a confession without words. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't pull back. She thought about all the times she had been told to stay small, to not overdo it, to keep things easy. The music answered those memories without anger, only honesty. The piano responded with a full, rounded sound. Even the uneven keys seemed to soften. The notes blended into something that felt whole. Time seemed to stretch. She had no idea how long she had been playing. The room existed only as sound and breath. She felt the audience now not as pressure, but as presence. They were with her, following the music without trying to understand it. That connection surprised her. The melody began to rise again, this time with quiet strength. Not loud, not fast, just sure. Carried hope without saying so directly. Her hands moved smoothly, guided by instinct rather than thought. She didn't worry about mistakes. If one happened, it passed like a small ripple, absorbed by the flow of the music. As she approached the ending, she slowed down. Each note lingered a little longer, as if saying goodbye. The room held its breath. She returned to the simple pattern she had started with, bringing the music full circle. Felt right, like closing a door gently instead of letting it slam. The final note faded into the air. She lifted her hands and let them rest in her lap. For a moment, no one moved. The silence that followed was different from the silence before she began. It wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with feeling. She stayed still, her heart beating fast but steady. She didn't look up yet. She needed one more second to ground herself. Then she heard it. A breath. A soft sound of someone shifting in their seat. A quiet sniffle from somewhere in the room. Applause didn't come right away. Instead, there was another brief pause, as if people were checking with themselves before reacting. When the clapping finally started, it was gentle at first. A few hands. Then more. It grew quickly, filling the room with sound. She looked up then, blinking under the lights. Faces looked back at her differently now. Some smiled. Some looked thoughtful. A few looked surprised. She stood slowly and nodded once, unsure of what else to do. The applause continued longer than she expected. Someone near the side wiped their eyes. As she stepped away from the piano, her legs felt unsteady. She moved to the side and let the next part of the program continue, her ears still ringing slightly. People glanced at her as they passed. Some smiled without saying anything. Others looked like they wanted to speak but didn't know how. She found a quiet spot and sat down, her hands resting in her lap just as they had been moments before. They still felt warm, as if the keys were there. Inside, she felt a mix of relief and disbelief. She had done it. She had played the way she needed to. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure. The piano had carried her truth into the room, and people had listened. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed in the room. She remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, letting her breathing return to normal. Her hands rested quietly, no longer shaking. The piano stood there, silent again, as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything felt different. When she finally stood and stepped away, she kept her head low. She wasn't trying to avoid anyone. She just needed space to understand what had just taken place. The sound of clapping still echoed in her ears, mixed with a strange calm she hadn't expected. As the event continued, she sat near the side, half listening to the rest of the program. Her attention drifted. Her mind replayed the music in fragments, certain notes returning again and again. She wondered if she had played too long, if she had crossed some unseen line. Doubt tried to return, but it didn't settle the way it used to. People began to approach her during a short break. The first person simply said thank you and walked away. Another paused, searching for words, then said the music reminded them of someone they missed. A few others nodded quietly, offering small smiles. No one spoke loudly. No one joked. Their reactions were gentle and sincere. She listened more than she spoke. That felt natural to her. She nodded, smiled, and thanked them back. Each interaction felt unreal, as if they were speaking to someone else. She had never been the center of attention like this. One of the organizers came over, their tone different from before. They mentioned they hadn't expected the response. They admitted they were surprised by how the room had changed. She could hear the shift in their voice, a mix of respect and uncertainty. She replied simply, saying she was glad people enjoyed it. Inside, she felt a quiet sense of validation. Not pride exactly, but relief. She hadn't imagined the connection. It had been real. As the event came to an end, people slowly gathered their things. Conversations hummed through the space, but now and then, she caught parts of sentences that mentioned the piano, the feeling, the silence after the last note. Each time, she felt a small wave of disbelief. She packed up quietly, even though she hadn't brought much with her. Habit guided her movements. When she finally stepped outside, the air felt cool against her face. The sky had darkened, and the lights inside glowed behind the windows. She walked for a while instead of heading straight home. Her steps were slow, measured. The city sounds felt softer, as if she were still wrapped in the music. Every so often, she paused, listening to her own footsteps. For years, music had been something private, almost hidden. Now it felt exposed, but not in a painful way. It felt like opening a window after a long time. That night, sleep came late. Her mind kept replaying the faces in the room, the stillness, the applause. She wondered what would happen next, if anything. She didn't expect sudden change. Life had taught her not to assume too much. The next morning, her phone buzzed more than usual. Messages appeared from people she barely knew. Some said they had been there. Others said they had heard about the performance from someone else. A short video clip had been shared, shaky and imperfect, but clear enough to capture the feeling. She watched the clip once, then again. Seeing herself play felt strange. She barely recognized the person on the screen. That person looked calm, focused, brave. She wasn't sure she felt like that inside. Over the next few days, the messages continued. A few people asked if she played anywhere else. Someone mentioned a small gathering that might need a pianist. Another suggested she record something simple and share it. None of the requests were loud or demanding. They came gently, one by one. She didn't answer right away. She needed time to think. Attention was new to her, and she wasn't sure how to hold it without losing herself. She returned to the piano alone one evening, in a quiet space she knew well. The keys greeted her like old friends. She played the same melody she had played at the event, but it sounded different now. Softer, more reflective. The weight of being heard changed the way she listened to herself. She stopped halfway through and laughed quietly, not out of humor but surprise. She realized she was no longer playing from a place of hiding. Something had shifted inside her. Still, doubt hadn't disappeared completely. A small voice wondered if the moment had been a one-time thing, if people would feel the same again, if she could live up to what they now expected. She reminded herself that expectations were not her responsibility. Honesty was. A week later, she agreed to play again, this time in an even smaller setting. No stage, no formal program, just a room and a piano. The decision felt right. She wasn't chasing attention. She was following the same quiet pull that had guided her before. The second performance was different. People listened closely from the first note. There was no instruction to keep it simple this time. No warnings, only trust. Afterward, someone told her the music made them feel less alone. That sentence stayed with her, felt heavier than applause. She began to understand that what she offered wasn't about skill or complexity. It was about presence, about allowing space for others to feel something they often pushed aside. The story of that first performance continued to spread slowly. Not in headlines or big announcements, but in conversations. Someone told someone else. A clip was shared here and there. Each retelling softened the edges, leaving only the feeling behind. She stayed grounded by returning to her routine. Work, quiet evenings, time at the piano. She didn't rush into anything bigger. She didn't feel the need to explain herself. One afternoon, she received a message from someone who had been in the audience that first night. They said they had been having a difficult time and hadn't planned to stay long at the event. The music had made them sit back down. She read the message twice. Then she set her phone down and stared out the window for a long time. That was when the weight of it truly settled in. The piano hadn't just filled a room. It had reached people in ways she couldn't see. That realization didn't make her feel powerful. It made her feel responsible in the best sense of the word. She returned to the piano again that night, not to practice, but to listen. She played softly, letting the sound drift through the space. There was no fear in her hands now, only care. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be loud or fast. It would move the way her music always had. Slowly, honestly, one note at a time. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to keep it small. The weeks that followed moved quietly, but nothing felt the same as before. Life did not suddenly transform into something dramatic. There were no big stages or bright lights waiting for her. Instead, there was a steady change inside her, slow and deep, like water finding a new path. She continued to work, continued to handle her daily responsibilities, but music now carried a different weight. Each time she sat at the piano, she felt more present. She no longer played to escape or hide. She played to connect even when she was alone. Small invitations kept coming. A quiet gathering here, calm space there. She accepted some and gently declined others. She learned to listen to her instincts. If a place felt rushed or noisy, she stepped back. If it felt honest, she said yes. At each place she played, she began the same way. Slowly, simply. A few soft notes to settle the room. People often didn't notice at first. They were talking, shifting, distracted. She didn't mind. She trusted the music to find them when they were ready. And it always did. She noticed the same pattern again and again. Conversations faded. Breathing slowed. Faces softened. It was never loud or dramatic. It was quiet and human. That was enough. After one small performance, someone asked her why her music felt different. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. She said she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was only trying to be honest. The person nodded, as if that was exactly the answer they needed. At home, she kept a simple routine. Some nights she played for a long time. Other nights, she only touched the keys for a few minutes. She stopped forcing herself to practice in strict ways. She trusted her connection instead. One evening, she returned to the same melody she had played at the very first event. The one she had been told to keep simple. Her fingers remembered it easily. The notes felt familiar, like an old conversation. As she played, she noticed how much it had changed. Not in structure, but in feeling. There was more space now. More confidence. Less fear. She smiled softly, realizing that the music had grown because she had grown. She thought back to the girl she once was, listening to a broken radio, imagining a piano she couldn't touch yet. She wished she could tell that girl one thing, that being quiet did not mean being weak, that simplicity could carry great strength. The messages from listeners continued, though less often now. Some were short. Some were deeply personal. She read each one carefully. She didn't reply to all of them, but she held them with respect. She understood that when people share feelings, it is a gift. One message stayed with her more than the others. It said the music reminded them to slow down and feel again. She reread it several times, then closed her eyes and breathed deeply. That was exactly what music had done for her all these years. She never chased attention. When people suggested bigger opportunities, she considered them carefully. Some she accepted. Some she let go. She didn't measure success the way others did. For her, success meant staying true. There were moments of doubt, of course. Quiet nights when she wondered if the interest would fade. If she would be forgotten. Those thoughts still visited, but they no longer stayed long. She had learned not to fight them, only to let them pass. She kept returning to the piano. Always the piano. It had become her anchor. One afternoon, she was invited back to the same place where it had all started. The room looked the same. The piano sat in the same corner. But the feeling was different. The people there greeted her warmly, without instructions this time. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she didn't play. She simply listened to the room, to the quiet hum of life around her. Then she began. The melody flowed naturally, shaped by everything she had learned since that first night. It was simple, yes, but it carried depth. Each note felt intentional, honest. When she finished, the reaction was gentle and sincere. No shock this time. No surprise. Just understanding. That felt even more powerful. As she stood up, she felt complete. Not because she had reached an end, but because she had found balance. Later that evening, she walked home under a sky filled with soft light. The city moved around her, unaware of her thoughts. She welcomed that anonymity. It allowed her to stay grounded. She realized that the real change had not been in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She no longer felt the need to shrink her voice. She no longer feared being too much. She understood now that being told to keep it simple had never been a limitation. It had been an invitation to find strength in truth. At home, she opened the window and let the night air in. She sat at the piano one last time before bed. No plans. No audience. Just sound. Her fingers moved slowly, confidently. The music filled the room, soft and steady. She played not to perform, not to prove, but to be present. As the final note faded, she rested her hands and smiled to herself. The journey was not over. It was simply unfolding, one honest note at a time. And somewhere along the way, without trying to, she had turned simplicity into pure wonder.